I see everyone joining in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on sustainable procurement in rough seas, navigating sustainability in an era of uncertainty. I am Jigar Kanjani, Professional Development Program Coordinator at Supply Chain Canada West, and I'll be your moderator for this session. While folks are still joining, we have got a quick sneak peek of an exciting event happening next month. One we are really looking forward to here at Supply Chain Canada. Peter, can we please get the video rolling?
Experience golf like never before at the Procurement Professional Open, Supply Chain Canada's premier golf tournament in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. Join us on June 11th, 2025, at the stunning Silvertip Resort in Canmore, Alberta. Nestled in the Bow Valley, this 600-acre mountain course offers breathtaking views and an unforgettable golfing experience. As the official kickoff event for the Supply Chain Canada National Conference, this tournament offers the perfect opportunity to network with peers, clients, and industry decision makers in a relaxed setting. Enjoy our Texas Scramble format on course mini games and exciting prizes. Your registration includes cart rental, green fees, transportation from downtown Calgary, breakfast, and more. Starting bright and early at 6:30 a.m. with transportation from the Hyatt downtown, enjoy a full day of golf followed by an invitation to the exclusive Fellowship Award reception at the Ampersand on June 12th, 6:30 p.m. Spaces are limited for this exclusive event. Register now.
Thanks for that, Peter. Looks amazing, right? That's the Procurement Professional Open happening this June at Silvertip in Canmore. It's not just about golf. It's a full day to unwind, meet people across the industry, and kick off the national conference on the high note. If you're planning to join us in Calgary, definitely consider being a part of this. We would love to see you there. Now, on to today's session. Just a couple of quick things before we get into the main conversation. This session is being recorded, and you'll get both the recording and slides afterwards. So you don't need to worry about taking notes unless you want to. If you are a SCMP holder in Alberta, your CPD credits will be added automatically. For SCMP holders outside of Alberta, just make sure to log it manually in your Supply Chain Canada portal. You are all in listen-only mode for now, but we have got multiple ways for you to join the conversation. First, use the Q&A box anytime during the session if you have question. Do not wait until the very end. Put it in as you go. Want to speak up during the discussion portion? We do have a discussion portion during the speaker slides. And so you can just raise your hand and we'll unmute you so that you can share your thoughts during the discussion portion. And of course, you have the chat box here on Zoom platform. Feel free to drop in comments, reactions, or questions throughout the session. Now, on to today's topic and why it is so important. Let's face it, these are turbulent times for procurement. From trade wars and ESG backlash to new compliance pressure, sustainability can often feel like it's taking a backseat. But in reality, it's more critical than ever. Today's session will explore how procurement professionals can still stay the course and make sustainable decisions even when the waters are rough. We have an incredible panel up today to walk us through this. Firstly, we have Peter Polanowski, Senior ESG Consultant and Responsible Sourcing Team Lead at SLR Consulting, joins us from Calgary, Alberta. Peter brings over 14 years of experience helping governments, indigenous communities, and corporations drive climate strategy, sustainable sourcing, and ESG reporting. He's joined by Tara Tamang, a junior consultant under the Corporate Sustainability Advisory discipline at Asala Consulting Canada, where she helps clients improve their environmental, social, and governance strategies. And our special guest expert today is Dr. Nisha Kulangara, an independent consultant from Ottawa who brings deep insights into global regulatory shifts and ESG trends. Thank you all for being here. Without further ado, let's get rolling. Tara, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jagar. We're so happy to be here today. Before we begin, we would just like to take a moment to honor the traditional territories on which we live and work and the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded these lands for generations. We specifically acknowledge that our facilitators are joining today from Calgary and Toronto. In Calgary, we recognize the traditional Treaty 7 territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. This includes the peoples of the Siksika, Kainai, Blood, and Pegane bands, as well as the Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to the Otipemisiwak Métis government of the Métis Nation in Battle River Territory within Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Elbow Métis District 6. In Toronto, we acknowledge the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and that it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit. Alrighty, so our agenda for today will start off with a bit about SLR and then touch base on our learning goals and objectives of the workshop and things we hope you'll take away from today. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it all and dive into corporate sustainability and procurement. We've also prepared some small group discussions, and finally we'll end with some guidance and next steps. As we go through the session today, we'll be focusing on a few key ideas that we think are especially important right now. First, we'll take a step back and look at what's really shaping the sustainability landscape this year. The world is moving fast, so we'll talk about the major forces that are driving change and how those shifts are showing up in the way companies operate and plan for the future. Next, we'll get into sustainable procurement and how to build smarter and more resilient systems. We'll look at how to adapt your strategies so they hold up under pressure, especially when global challenges start to strain supply chains. Speaking of resilience, we'll spend some time on risk, how to see it coming, how to respond, and how to design processes that can actually absorb shocks rather than fall apart. And finally, we'll bring in some best practices, things that are working well for leading organizations, and talk about how you can make these approaches work for your context, even if you're just starting out or facing some tough constraints. Throughout the session, we hope you'll be thinking about these ideas and how they apply to your work and next steps you can take. If you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end during our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thank you for everyone joining in today. So I want to pose a little icebreaker question for everyone attending. If you could sum up the year so far in 1 or 2 words, what would they be? And you can just type in the chat. I can't see the chat, so for the moderators, maybe you can, speak as some comments come up. So 1 or 2 words, if you were to describe the year so far, what would they be?
We have hectic, chaos, simply wow, uncertain chaos, changing, challenging, exciting.
So it's a nice mix. There's some excitement there as well, so it's always nice to have some optimism. But I can see that the general sense is that this year's been challenging to say the least. But even before these most recent geopolitical headwinds came to the fore, which we'll talk about in a moment, you as procurement professionals, you were already faced with competing priorities and multiple responsibilities, right? So, and you're already demanding day-to-day responsibilities. you've had to wear the hats of sustainability professionals over the last few years, as well as risk management professionals as well, not to mention other roles and responsibilities. But as you work to address the most immediate threats, namely the impacts posed by the US tariff situation, how can you at the same time look beyond the horizon of the immediate danger and work to address the growing number of sustainability related risks, while at the same time work to build resilience in your supply chains? And that's not an easy task. So over the next several minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about sort of the trajectory of corporate sustainability and sustainable procurement leading up to this year. And we're going to try to understand how we've arrived at this, at these headwinds and at this inflection point. We're also going to discuss the need to really think in terms of systems and interdependencies, while trying to link your current procurement challenges to sustainability opportunities as you try to, future-proof your supply chains against, even more disruptions. And while the future will continue to be increasingly uncertain, one thing that is clear is that, and that we hope to communicate throughout this webinar, is that you as procurement professionals are going to play a very critical role in driving sustainability forward for your organizations. So a little recap in terms of, the corporate sustainability trajectory over the last few to several years. We've seen an almost exponential uptake of corporate sustainability investment and adoption, and that's across industries and across geographies. So within Canada, within North America, and globally. And in that time, we've seen corporate sustainability move from what was once largely a PR exercise, to a whole industry, and from a niche concern to real extreme business priority across the board. There's also, we've also seen a growing regulatory framework that's been supported by an alignment of global ESG standards and frameworks. And that's been supported further by stakeholder expectations, as well as a multitude of other drivers. And sustainability initiatives have been increasingly implemented across industries. So in a nutshell, corporate sustainability has gone from a nice to have to a must have, as many companies have gone from siloed ESG initiatives to integrated strategies that connect issues such as climate, nature, and social impact, to name a few. And that direction of travel, in terms of, embedding corporate sustainability in your business operations, is good and it's important. And regulations and legislations aside, the private sector's role in sustainable development really can't be understated. But the evolution hasn't been perfect. And even before the new US administration, there were cracks in corporate sustainability that would eventually come to a head. And so those cracks have begun to show themselves this year through a confluence of factors, which we'll get into in a moment. And for us sustainability practitioners, it's hard enough as is to stay on top of the, ever evolving regulations and best practices, and that's on a good day. And so this year, has been pretty different. And we've become pretty good at dealing with virtually non-existent budgets, minimal resources, and internalizing worst case climate scenarios. But the year really did get off to a rough start. And when you look at the headlines, it seems like every day has brought with it some news of corporate sustainability rollbacks of some kind. So whether they're a large investment fund pulling out of the Net Zero Finance Alliance, or a company that's letting go of its sustainability hires, or regulators holding off on mandatory climate rules. There's also been some promising news of companies and investment funds staying the course, but the point here is that it's been hard to navigate the signal to noise ratio, even for us as practitioners. So we can imagine how hard it would be for people, in the sustainable procurement function, or other roles and responsibilities across companies. All that to say is that corporate sustainability is at a crossroads presently, but in order to understand how this relates to the procurement and sustainable procurement function and where to go from here, we need to understand some of the key headwinds or drivers and the resulting impacts. So let's look at some of these headwinds. So to begin with, there's been that rising anti-ESG or anti quote unquote woke sentiment that's come along with these geopolitical shifts that we've seen, not just in the US, but in the EU and other parts of the world. And this was happening even before the incoming of the US administration. There's also been the US tariffs and associated effects, which, as you procurement professionals are working hard to, understand and address the risks that come along with those headwinds. We've also seen regulatory rollback. So in the US, you've had the Securities and Exchange Commission pause their climate rule indefinitely. In Canada, you've had the Canadian Securities Administrators pause their work on a mandatory climate disclosure rule. And on the business side, there's also been greenwashing and resulting litigation concerns. With the amendments to the Competition Act last year, we've seen a chilling effect. One of these unintended consequences of companies scrubbing their once publicly available reports from their websites. That's also, come along with organizations walking back on their sustainability goals and targets. And there's also been, in some cases, an overstatement of an ESG investment strategies. The notion that, ESG funds will always outperform the market. So when we look at these impacts of these headwinds, we've seen things like green hushing or not publicly communicating your corporate sustainability initiatives or even a rollback of goals and targets. We have seen ESG investment withdrawals. We've also seen sustainability resource and budget cutbacks across some organizations, not all, but some. And so there's been this reevaluation of sustainability goals and targets for a lot of companies. And, in one sense, this was sort of a long time coming. And it's important for companies going forward to really evaluate and be very intentional with the initiatives and goals and targets that they are pursuing. But that's just a little bit about, what brought us here and what some of the impacts have been on the corporate sustainability front. Now let's talk about the state of sustainable procurement. So sustainable procurement has followed a similar trajectory, right? So pre-2025, your procurement function, increasingly saw roles and responsibilities related to sustainability, right? We've had a strengthening global regulatory or regional and national regulatory framework around, human rights risks, such as modern slavery and child labor, as well as Scope 3 emissions, for instance. There's been rising adoption of ESG requirements by vendors, right? There's been a lot of focus on supply chain transparency. Part of that is regulatory driven, and part of that's been stakeholder driven. And then there's been a shift from, sort of just risk reduction and compliance with ESG regulations to really attaining corporate sustainability objectives and innovation. So present day, when we talk about the state of sustainable procurement, right, we have the same issues that, that we talked about in terms of corporate sustainability. The US tariff threats, the rising anti-ESG, anti-woke sentiment, and that's kind of, at a global level. But then more on the operational level, and this is what we've heard from clients, a lack of transparency into supply chains, challenges in obtaining supplier data, challenges in really engaging with suppliers, right? And that all depends on based on your leverage and other factors, as well as, the multitude of competing priorities across your procurement roles and responsibilities. But what have those impacts been, especially when we think about everything that's changed in the last few months, keeping in mind, some of those big risks, mainly the tariff war. How have all these headwinds come to play and affected your role within as procurement professionals, and what have those impacts been? And this is something that we really want to explore today, which brings us to our poll.
Oh, so building off of what Peter was talking about the last little while there, we have a quick poll for you all. So you should be seeing it on your screen now or in the next few seconds. The poll asks, how have recent geoeconomic shifts affected your sustainability initiatives within your organization and or role? And you can rank your answer on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being not at all, and 4 being sustainability initiatives have been completely deprioritized. So we'll give you guys a few seconds to answer. You can also think about what does supply chain resilience mean to you, and what kind of responsible sourcing initiatives were you or your company undertaking prior to 2025? Okay, awesome. I think that's everything.
So when we look at the results there, it's not surprising we have a good mix. So for some of you, you haven't noticed a change in your sustainability initiatives within your organization, your role. So that was 30% of you. Half of respondents said somewhat. 17% said they have been significantly deprioritized, and 3% said that they have been completely deprioritized. And this is what we're hearing from the market, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in energy, whether you're in retail. These shifts that have come about in the last few months are really, making sustainability professionals address their most immediate risks first. So it's not surprising that for some of you, there is a change in course. So let's move on to our first discussion question.
Okay, great. Our first discussion question states, how has procurement's role evolved regarding sustainability initiatives? What kind of sustainability or ESG initiatives have been in focus for you and your organization over the past few years? Please feel free to write these answers in the chat to get the discussion going. So you have a few minutes to do that. Okay, so we have our first answer here, more social procurement, bills S211, etc. To help with your answers, you can also think about the probing questions we asked earlier. So what does supply chain resilience mean to you? What kind of responsible sourcing initiatives were you or your company undertaking in 2025? We have a construction company that uses equipment mainly, getting rid of conventional fuel to electric-driven equipment. Focusing on green initiatives, another one, like solar panels and renewable diesel. And of course, lots and lots of reporting from procurement regarding ESG. Removal of single-use plastic. Yep, that's definitely a big one with the Federal Plastics Registry coming up.
So what I'm hearing is, really, there's been a whole host of priorities depending on your organization, right? So whether it's focusing on the purchase of renewable electricity, right, addressing removal of single-use plastics, uh, to things such as electrification. But then there's also the reporting burden, right? And then some of those regulatory drivers, right? So we know that you as procurement professionals have been faced with a barrage of, not just sustainability priorities, but a lot of questionnaires to answer from your customers and other stakeholders as well. And so following this, well,
Yeah, our second discussion question for you is how do you see the sustainability and ESG priorities shifting over the last few months as a result of shifting risks and priorities for your business or function? Again, you can write these in the chat.
and this is really for the folks that, who did answer in the poll that there is a reprioritization happening, right? Because this is something that, we're still trying to figure out, how have those sustainability initiatives shifted for you?
We have overall confusion regarding considering and figuring
Okay.
out their own processes. Another person saying that it's being kicked into high gear, and that's kind of how it's been shifting for them.
Yeah, and that really speaks to, the variety and how different companies and organizations and industries are tackling these current issues, right? So for some of you, you're really trying to reconfigure and reset. For other organizations, yeah, we've also heard that, for some sustainability initiatives, like climate risk, for instance, and addressing climate risk, some initiatives have been, continue to be a high focus.
This is a really interesting one. Someone else said user needs versus policy have been at odds.
Can you, for the person who put that in, can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
We can actually invite Ryan to take himself off mute and share if he wishes.
Ryan, you can raise your hand and then we can allow you to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Hi, Ryan.
Yeah, I'd just say that immediate needs. So, a broken down truck, for example, is at odds, with our 2030 policy, trying to decarbonize. Do you, if you have a vehicle or part of the fleet that's broken down immediately, it's opened up the question of, do you replace the engine? Do
Yeah.
you buy a new vehicle? Do you look at, electric? Do you look at what's available in the market immediately? So it's really kind of opened up for us a challenge around how do you balance the policy and your goals with what's actually available in the market right now. And when you talk about fleet, except specifically, what's available for fleet is either innovative or it's not actually available. So there's a lot of parts of the market they're just not available for decarbonization.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Ryan. And those are important considerations to address. Other things that we've been hearing as well is, something that's, well, often talked about. There's costs associated with the sustainability initiatives, right? In order to realize that value creation opportunity, like those value creation opportunities, you first have to absorb some of those costs, and that's those costs are really important to factor in, right? And costs are financial. They're also, human resource requirements that you need to consider. Um, And then, there's also differences in terms of public versus, private procurement, right? So a lot of you folks in private procurement, there's a different risk profile and a different reprioritization of needs versus working in public procurement. And then, so one answer here is that social procurement initiatives have been a large part of sustainable procurement. And these have been fairly firmly parked over the last few months in favor of focusing on managing cost supply risks related to the tariff situation. And all valid, right? Those are the most immediate risks that need to be addressed. And, as it happens, a lot of those other initiatives are likely going to take a back seat. But while this is all playing out, and thank you so much for the discussion, we had a lot of really good answers. As all of these issues are being played out, and as all of you are working to really, try to address the most immediate risks present within your organization, within your roles, but also kind of reconciling what else needs to be prioritized, sustainability risks globally keep increasing, right? So on the left-hand side there, you have, this is the planetary boundaries framework, which shows that there are, in addition to climate risks, other issues such as fresh water and the integrity of our biosphere that are reaching critical tipping points. And it's important to understand that whether it was the COVID-19 pandemic or our situation with our American neighbors, these aren't one-off events, unfortunately, these disruptions that we're facing. And they're not causes, but effects stemming from larger interconnected crises. So the graph, or sorry, the figure on the right is, sort of illustrating the polycrisis, which is a term to describe the social, economic, and ecological crises faced by humans. And the reality is that our society and economy are fundamentally dependent on the Earth system, right? It provides our food, it provides our water, our energy and raw materials, and issues such as climate change and nature loss, driven by human activity, they threaten the stability of the Earth system. And so the point is, while the future is unpredictable, it's becoming harder to predict, and these seemingly one-off events, these major disruptions are very likely going to increase in frequency, and we're just not prepared. We're not prepared on a societal level, let alone an organizational one. So on this slide, you'll see some risks. This is taken from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report that's put out every year. And the short-term risks are at the top. The long-term risks are at the bottom. No shortage of risks, many of which we're familiar with. But if you look at the long-term trend, and long-term isn't 50 years away, it's not 40 or 30 or 20 years away. This is looking at the risk profile globally in the next 10 years. And what you see there is the majority of those risks are dominated by sustainability-related risks, environmental and social. And, these risks are all interdependent, and these risks are all things that executives and organizations need to be thinking about. And a funny thing happens when companies and executives are faced with more immediate risks, like, this inflection point that we're in 2025. We tend to retreat inward when immediate threats demand our attention. It's kind of hardwired into us as humans. And uncertainty, whatever the kind, It causes stress, it consumes our attention, and it leaves fewer mental resources for creative thinking and strategic vision. But this kind of mental hijacking can lead to behaviors that actually worsen organizational instability. And there's a paradox here, which is important to address. When we look at these longer term risks, right? When we want to create a path to organizational stability long term, we need to look further ahead precisely when we're faced with more immediate threats. So in this time period that's defined by relentless uncertainty, the path to organizational stability lies in actually being able to look beyond the horizon, being able to look beyond the immediate risks that are happening today. And that requires us to shift our thinking, right? Thinking beyond the linear way of thinking, which we've been trained to do in our society, to think in terms of systems, looking at these risks and seeing them as interdependencies. So how do we chart a path forward? When we look at redefining corporate sustainability, this inflection point has taught us that, sustainability as usual was far from perfect. And going forward, we need to be able to do some things differently. While at the same time, there's some, themes that are going to continue to remain present. So, when we talk about wading through the noise, right? Climate and other sustainability risks, like we just mentioned, they're becoming ever more present. There's real value at stake for organizations, and not addressing these risks is no longer an option. But in addition to that, broad stakeholder demands, whether it's investor demands from public writ large for, more sustainable products and services, or your B2B customers, those demands are still strong. A lot of companies going forward, whether it's because of the US administration or just being more intentional with their efforts, they may be changing the language around ESG. Hate it or love it, if a lot of people don't like the term ESG, maybe that's going to be dropped from the vernacular going forward, but companies are still making progress on their most material sustainability topics. And really, companies that understand their material risks and opportunities and are able to effectively integrate them into core business operations are able to create long-term lasting value. And these are just some stats from a report that one of our subsidiaries did on, on the impact of the U.S. administration and ESG, and a lot of executives, we're still saying in 2025 that there's a real potential for long-term value creation that's driving these portfolio companies into ESG investing. So when we talk about building sustainable, resilient supply chains, seems like supply chain resilience, especially post-COVID-19, has really become, a buzzword or buzz term. And again, based from what we're hearing from our clients, and these are some best practices and terms and trends that we're seeing that are going to kind of continue to predominate the sustainable procurement function. So, you're familiar with the fighting fighting against forced labor and child labor and supply chains act, which was an act really created to increase the transparency in companies' supply chains as they address human rights risks. That transparency pull is evolving into more of a due diligence piece where that supply chain visibility is forcing companies to really look into their systems of how they effectively identify, assess, and mitigate those risks. The digital transformation that's happening just in the corporate sustainability space in general, but also with regards to sustainable procurement, is actually going to help you as procurement professionals incorporating sustainability really get better quality data and better quality insights to manage those sustainability issues. Waste reduction and circularity, are going to become and are becoming increasingly stronger levers for cost optimization and efficiency. And as some of you work to rejig your supply chains, you look at reshoring and friendshoring, social procurement provides a really good opportunity to invest in the communities and invest in the suppliers that you're doing business with. And last but not least, scope 3 decarbonization, right? For the majority of companies, around 80% of an organization's environmental and social impact are found along the value chain, and scope 3 is no exception. So scope 3 decarbonization is going to continue to play an important role in the sustainable procurement function. But beyond these trends, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nisha. Beyond these trends, Nisha, how can you link some of the current challenges faced by procurement professionals today to some responsible sourcing opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these are some of the high-level examples on how we can reframe some of the challenges into opportunities. And of course, it is, some of these opportunities are sector specific. Like, for example, certain sectors will have higher priority for water conservation versus certain sectors will have a higher priority for waste management. So definitely these are high level examples of how you can build resilient supply chains. First thing is essentially, again, reframing challenges as opportunities, and also rethinking the traditional procurement approach, which focuses traditionally on costs, quality, delivery speed, flexibility, and having an agile supply chain. These are key priorities that we learn in procurement programs, and they are very important. But also integrating environmental, social, ethical, and indigenous considerations into your procurement decision making and procurement strategies. So some of the opportunities that we can think about is reducing costs. So if you integrate these environmental, social, ethical, and indigenous properties considerations into procurement decisions, there are cost reduction opportunities, whether it comes to waste disposal costs, integrating circularity into your supply chain, having more energy efficient program, and having recs in place. There are different ways to reduce costs when you integrate these sustainable procurement considerations. Also, you could be avoiding a lot of hidden costs. Other opportunities are, having, efficiency optimization. So you have your POs, purchase orders, and requisitions that are automated, and into that you can also automate ESG criteria while issuing these purchase orders to suppliers. So definitely that is another opportunity which will also have an impact on the environment. Another factor to consider. Risk management and scenario planning will help sustainable, help reduce supply disruptions and ensure traceability and due diligence. So I will give, one example would be, as we talked about, modern slavery transparency reporting. So, if you want to really move towards due diligence, looking at, beginning with your strategic suppliers, applying 80 by 20 rule, then looking at the product or the sector, the supplier that you are operating in, and the geographical location of the supplier, and identifying what are the modern slavery risks in your supply chain, and doing scenario planning. And in the long term, it is beneficial because employees want to work in employees want to work in organizations that follow supply chain due diligence when it comes to these issues related to modern slavery. Investors love to invest in such companies, and and consumers want to consume products from companies that implement these due diligence measures. With tariffs right now, that is the big hot topic right now. But again, there's an opportunity there to do a stress test your supply chain for, how you're impacted by those tariffs. Coming up with plan B and plan C in terms of renegotiating your contracts, instead of having boilerplate templates, but making sure that, there's contract language around tariffs, and making sure there are cost sharing mechanisms in place to really mitigate some of the risk right now. Diversifying supply chain base, supplier base is has been done in the past as well. Multi-sourcing strategies, having options for supplier substitution, and having that embedded into contractual planning is really good. That helps protect your supply chain from supply disruptions and enhances resilience as well. Reshoring is really, from an environmental perspective, reshoring is really beneficial to the organization in reducing GHG emissions, reducing bullwhip effect in your supply chain, so you don't have empty shelves sitting on, in stores, but uh, managing your lead time, especially if you reshore it, you are reducing your lead time. Also, in this process, there is opportunity for job creation. We are empowering local and diverse communities as we, work with indigenous suppliers and suppliers that identify themselves as diverse suppliers. Um, Another final option that is discussed here is forging stronger trade ties with the EU. EU is definitely leading when it comes to, they require higher sustainability threshold and compliance requirement, but when it comes to environmental and social issues. And this will also mean that as an organization, you will be working towards compliance towards a more robust ESG regulatory framework. And that is good in the long term and beneficial. So while we have mentioned these at a very high level, what would that look like from for a company? Firstly, at a very strategic level, the organization needs to focus on materiality issues. We have organizations that conduct double materiality assessment to identify material issues in at the organization and across the value chain. And this is really important. This has to be material issues impacting a beverage company will be different from issues impacting a company in the mining sector. So identifying those material issues are important. What are the high priorities, mid-level material issues for the organization? Second, aligning the sustainable procurement plan to the core business goals is important because these decision making has to make business sense. And so definitely aligning that. At the strategic level, this has to be data-driven decision making. So what does demand look like? Forecasting demand, what do we even, if we go towards more sustainable options, what does the supplier base look like? Do we have enough suppliers? How do we accelerate the capacity to increase our spend base on diverse suppliers? So these are things that have to be considered, so that's why it's much more at a strategic level. Definitely partnering with suppliers who are more sustainability focused, and partnering with stakeholders, industry partners, innovative research labs, seeking partnerships that can provide more innovative solutions and that are more purpose driven and that are more sustainability aligned with you as an organization. The final but the most important point is shifting focus to long-term value creation. And how can we do that? It has to be a more data-driven, evidence-based, empirical decision to craft a transformative roadmap. And that can happen only with effective stakeholder engagement in-house and also with your external stakeholders, your community, your suppliers, policymakers, to understand where the sector is right now. Doing ESG benchmarking. If there are leaders within your sectors who have successfully embedded sustainable procurement principles, what did that look like? How long does that take? And where are you as an organization at compared to those industry leaders? So a transformative roadmap would involve, stakeholder engagement, peer benchmarking, conducting interviews, conducting workshops, all of these have all of these factors go into creating the roadmap, both midterm, short-term, midterm, and long-term roadmap. And this also includes having assigned accountabilities at leadership level and also at departmental level, and having, smart timelines, understanding internal constraints as we interview different internal stakeholders. You also understand what are the constraints internally as an organization and what are the constraints at sector level. So that is where you can refine your procurement strategies by at the strategic level. But at the operational level, what does that look like for someone who is actually issuing the POs, someone who does material requirement planning or master scheduling? So that's where it is important to build your capacity and training in-house by providing educational resources about regulatory frameworks, even like basics like what are the 15 categories of scope 3? Where can we source, or where can we source from supplies that can provide sustainable materials? So, industry coalitions, conferences, educating the procurement and purchasing executive on what are the ESG criteria that are material to our sector, to our organization, and how can we embed that into our procurement decision making. And definitely also, creating database of suppliers that are sustainable suppliers that the organization can go to. These are different small, innovative small steps that companies can take at operational level. Effective resource management via lean manufacturing or reducing waste, all of these, circularity, reusing raw materials, all of these are small steps that companies can take at an operational level. Building social capital with strategic suppliers is very important because purchasing executives who are part of day-to-day operational activities, they need to understand the suppliers that are the strategic suppliers that are in place, and what kind of capacity constraints that they have, and how you can work with the suppliers to empower them. And so moving forward, I'll go really fast now, enabling digital tracking and having a proactive approach to compliance and risk mitigation to climate change and geopolitical shifts. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Sorry, I'm just aware of the time. Everyone will have a copy of these slides, so these are just the quick takeaways. I'm just gonna quickly skip through. Again, you'll have copies of the slides. Just a bit about SLR. You can just kind of go over in terms of what we do, our sustainability solutions as well. We have specific responsible sourcing advisory services that we can help you with. But with the time that we have, I do want to maximize it and leave it open for a Q&A for the last few minutes, so that any and all questions you can ask away in the time that we have. Thank you so much for being patient and listening today.
Hey, Peter, while we're waiting for some of the questions to come through, and again, everyone, if you can please post your questions in the chat function there. We just actually came off of a similar presentation with the Supply Chain Leaders Council, so council consisting of senior supply chain leaders on this very same topic and presentation from Peter and his team. And one of the things that sort of came back is, given that sustainability is facing these headwinds, really the recognition for the ability to do a better job in articulating the value of the efforts, right? And so if we're going to put efforts into social procurement, or take a much more environmental, thoughtful approach to our efforts, do you have any recommendations on for folks here on this webinar on what tools and where can they turn to, and what resources that they can use to help build the case for the important work that they do today?
Yeah, I think thanks, Ellen. And there were some really, really important points raised during that workshop, and certainly, one thing that's fallen short is linking these sustainability opportunities to actual impacts in terms of hard numbers, right? A lot of people, whether they are chief sustainability officers in their teams, or in this case, procurement professionals, right? You've been told just, sustainability it makes good business sense, and often you've taken professionals' word for it, but in order to make a business case, you really need to quantify those impacts. The issue is that a lot of these opportunities aren't as easily quantifiable. But I mean, that's not to say that they are not, right? There are costs and benefits associated to fleet electrification. There are costs and benefits associated to social procurement. So part of that is sustainability practitioners that are working with your organizations, doing a better job to translate that value. In order for you to make your business case, there's increasingly data out there and case studies of, whether it's peer competitors or just looking at the costs and benefits of certain initiatives, like whether it's implementing renewable energy credits, electrifying your fleet, or engaging in social procurement practices. They're not all created equal. Some of these initiatives, the data isn't as easy to quantify, but I think it starts with understanding in general the costs and benefits, but also understanding what your most material topics are as well, if that makes sense.
And certainly connected to this is also the important work around material assessment and double materiality assessments, and something that certainly for organizations to explore, consider where to focus your really scarce resource, and that work there would help them tremendously, and something that SLR can support you in that journey as well. As we sort of reach a close, I think one of the things that Peter, you and your team emphasize at the council workshop was just how important the procurement function is as we journey forward in all of this. I think as procurement professionals, we're in a extremely unique point in which we sit at the crossroads with so many organizations, whether it's finance, the business, different business units, and capital projects groups and whatnot. That being in that crossroads allows us to really look at the impact and costs. And one of the things that procurement professionals have always been focusing on is really understanding the total cost of ownership,
Mm-hmm.
of which total cost of ownership is understanding the costs. And as we shape what cost actually means, it's forcing us to really rethink the what is cost, and then what's also the benefit to organizations as well. And so all of you are in a wonderful spot to really influence that into your organization, so that we can continue to direct and focus efforts in the right place, areas in which is most important to the organization, and also the environment and social environment in which that organization operates. And then the important work around influencing our organization and articulating that strategy and the communication to your organization as well. I really want to thank Peter, Tara, and Anisha for your presentation today. Really impactful information that we can all take back. And I want to thank again everyone else who has joined us today as well. Thank you for joining us on our webinar today. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.